January 6, 2026. We're starting with a flashpoint headline that dropped just this morning, and it's pretty startling. Russian officers seek transfer to the rear from Ukraine's Pokrovsk direction, Partisan say. A sharp drop in motivation among Russian command personnel has been recorded on the Pokrovsk direction, the Partisan movement attaché reported. Get this. Partisans have found that officers of the Russian armed forces and units of the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade are mass submitting requests for transfers, basically trying to get to the rear or to, less active sections of the front. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Area and the latest deep dives by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover, well, what looks like the complete collapse of morale among Russian frontline command in one of the most vital sectors of the war. So for this deep dive, we're focusing hard on the Pokrovsk front. Based on the sources we've compiled, it's become this
vortex of institutional rot for the Russian military. Its basic structures are just failing. We're talking unprecedented officer desertion attempts, a massive scheme to cover up casualties by labeling dead soldiers as AWOL, and some really bizarre operational shifts from fiber optic drones to these flag-raising propaganda missions that are barely keeping a grinding advance going. So the big question we're chasing is, what does all this internal decay really tell us about the sustainability of Moscow's war aims?
Well, it tells you that the entire foundation of the operation is becoming incredibly brittle. I mean, when you see the command staff, the very people in charge of discipline and planning actively trying to flee the fighting, it suggests the pressure points aren't just stressed anymore, they're actually failing all at once.
So let's unpack that command crisis right there at the epicenter, the Pokrovsk front. The intel on this is coming mainly from the ATSH partisan movement, and they seem to have eyes everywhere. They're reporting that mid-level officers in units like the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade are putting in mass requests to transfer out.
Exactly. And this isn't just a few guys getting scared. This is systemic.
It's like the middle management of the war is trying to resign.
It is. And to really get why, you have to understand the psychological environment there. For these officers, the Pokrovsk direction is seen as a dangerous exile. It's not just the fighting. It's this pervasive paranoia, this fear that local Ukrainian residents are leaking their positions, their command posts, their supply routes.
So you feel like the ground itself is against you.
Right. It makes effective command almost impossible. You're spending more energy looking over your shoulder than planning your next move.
And that's got to be exhausting.
Yeah.
And that paranoia is then compounded by pressure from their own chain of command.
Right.
The local commanders are trying to block these transfers, right? Threatening disciplinary action, demotion.
They're using bureaucratic terror to keep people in place, basically. But that's a direct reflection of the incredible pressure coming from the very top. Our sources say the Russian general staff is in chaos. The Kremlin is hammering them over missed deadlines for political objectives, like Kupiansk or the Pokrovsk-Myrnorad area.
So it's a cascading failure. The Kremlin demands impossible victories.
Yes. And the general staff, they just pass that pressure down the line. They demand success no matter the cost. They're just throwing waves of soldiers into these assaults, ignoring the insane losses, all to generate reports that look good back in Moscow.
And the frontline officers get caught in the middle.
Precisely. They're getting blamed by their own troops for the catastrophic losses, and then they're being forced to sign off on official reports that are pure fiction. It's a system built on denial. And the guys at the very front are the ones paying the price.
That institutional dishonesty. It sets up this next truly horrifying detail we found. If the command is lying about progress, what are they doing about the human cost? Let's talk about this deception scheme, particularly in the 30th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade. They are registering soldiers killed in action Kia as having gone AWOL.
It's brutal, but from a cold bureaucratic perspective, it makes a kind of sense. It serves two main purposes. First, it helps conceal the real body count, and that number is already staggering. Sources documented 416,570 Russian casualties in 2025 alone.
Wow. And the second reason?
It's financial and political. By labeling a soldier AWOL, they avoid having to notify the relatives of a combat death, and more importantly, they avoid paying compensation.
So hide the bodies and save the money.
That's it. And the scale is huge. ADS agents inside the 30th Brigade said the number of these fake deserters is now high enough to form an entire brigade on paper.
An entire brigade of dead men listed as deserters.
Think about that.
The impact on the men still fighting must be devastating.
Yeah.
If you know that if you die, your commander can just write you off as a deserter, deny your family everything, why would you keep fighting?
That's the core of the problem. That's what's causing the morale to just plummet. ADSH reported that it creates this profound fear. The soldiers know they're disposable, that their own system can just erase them from history. And when that trust is gone, the only thing left to maintain discipline is pure force.
Which brings us to these grim historical echoes. The use of barrier troops, the Zagradilnayo Triadi from the Red Army.
It's a terrifying echo, and it's not just theory. We have contemporary evidence. Ukrainian drones have filmed Russian commanders ordering their own men to be tied to trees and just abandoned as punishment. And on top of that physical violence, there's financial pressure. The Kremlin formalized withholding pay for things like going AWOL or refusing an order.
They're trying to starve them into compliance. But the irony is just amazing. Our sources say that for some soldiers, it's not working. They're actually calculating that going to jail for 2 to 4 years for refusing an order is the better option. They're literally saying it's better to get sent to prison than to go to the front line and die there.
And that one sentence just tells you everything you need to know about how lethal the Pokrovsk front is. When prison looks like a safe haven, the attrition rate has to be astronomical. And when you look at the numbers, it is.
Let's get into that cost.
Yeah.
So Russian forces advanced about 13.24 square kilometers a day in 2025. On paper, that sounds like slow but steady progress. What was the real price for that?
The price was staggering. Sources document between 78 and 83 casualties for every single square kilometer they seized.
So for a few city blocks, they're losing almost a full company.
Documented casualties, yes. This is attrition warfare at its most brutal and, frankly, most unsustainable.
That level of loss forced a major tactical shift in late 2025, right? They just couldn't keep doing these large mechanized assaults.
Correct. The ranks were emptying out too fast, so they pivoted. They moved to these small group infiltration missions, tiny fire teams, maybe 2 or 3 soldiers. It allows them to make tiny gains, but presents a much smaller target for Ukrainian drones and artillery.
And they're using this new tactic to fuel a cognitive warfare campaign. What does that actually look like?
It's what's being called the flag-raising template. These small teams are sent just to raise a Russian flag over a contested building. They don't even have to hold it. The whole point is to get the footage for propaganda, to create this narrative of inevitable victory and try to undermine Western support for Ukraine.
Even if that team gets wiped out 10 minutes later.
Especially then, the footage is all that matters.
But these tactics are only possible because of a huge leap in their drone technology. Specifically, we're hearing about the scaled production of fiber optic FPV drones. Why is that so important?
It's a game changer against electronic warfare. Fiber optic cables use light, not radio waves, so they're basically immune to jamming. This lets these small, lethal teams operate with their own air support, even in heavily defended areas.
And the range increase is just wild. From 7 kilometers in early 2025 to 50 or 60 kilometers now.
It's a massive force multiplier, and they're extending it even further with mothership drones that can carry and launch these FPVs deep into the Ukrainian rear. It's not just a frontline weapon anymore, it's an interdiction campaign to choke off Ukrainian supply lines.
Which has terrible consequences for civilians. We learned that by late 2025, they had fire control over the main escape routes from Pokrovsk, trapping about 1,200 civilians.
Absolutely. But even with these tech advances, the battlefield is basically static. The drone parity on both sides means neither can really maneuver without taking those astronomical losses. So Pokrovsk is locked. Russia controls about 2/3 of the city, but the fight is for meters, not kilometers. They're just bleeding lives and tech to hold their position.
And that reality brings us to the next big crisis.
Yeah.
Force generation. If they keep up this rate of attrition, where do they find the bodies?
Well, the volunteer model paying high salaries is pretty much exhausted. They've run out of willing men. So now the Kremlin is preparing for compulsory reserve mobilization in 2026. They're shifting to a single year-round conscription cycle and authorizing the call-up of inactive reservists, the Zapas for so-called military assemblies.
Which everyone knows is just a thin veil for getting them ready for mandatory deployment.
Exactly. They're out of options that don't risk major political blowback from a forced draft.
And while all this is happening on the front, the rear is becoming a huge liability because of the ATH partisan movement. Our sources say ATH has metastasized throughout the entire Russian military.
That's the perfect word for it. It's an undetectable cancer spreading through the system. They claim to have agents inside the general staff offices in Moscow now. Their actions sabotaging railways, monitoring logistics, force Russia to divert combat troops just to secure their own rear areas.
And the psychological effect must be crippling.
It is. It creates this paranoia where, as one source put it, Every officer suspects his deputy of being a spy. Attrition is effectively turning the entire Russian rear into a contested zone.
This internal rot, the command collapse, the deception, the manpower crisis, it stands in such stark contrast to the image of unity at Kremlin projects. And when you look at the Russian population, that disconnect is growing. A survey in November showed 65% of Russians think it's time for peace talks.
That domestic mood is a huge problem for the Kremlin. The New Year's wishes for 2026 were all about an end to the war, a true miracle, a desire to stop living in constant tension. That public pressure, combined with the military's internal bleeding, is creating a real crisis of confidence.
So you have a military machine that is rotting from the inside out, and a population that desperately wants peace. And yet, the Kremlin's diplomatic demands, like Ukraine withdrawing from all 4 oblasts, are completely disconnected from that reality.
Totally disconnected. And we can put a hard timeline on that disconnect. Let's say Russia continues its current slow advance of about 14.4 square kilometers a day. At that rate, it would take them until April 1st, 2029, just to seize the rest of the 4 claimed oblasts. And that's a best-case scenario. That projection doesn't even account for huge obstacles like crossing the Dnipro River or taking major cities. So it raises the real question. Can Moscow actually afford the time, the exhaustion, and the human cost of a 5-year war of attrition when its system is already hemorrhaging morale and support? That timeline makes their goal look less like a strategy and more like a mathematical fantasy.
A compelling and very quantifiable thought to end on. That's the real measurable cost of institutional rot. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.